He never misses the July 2024 Industry Pro interview with David Lentz of Brewed Fiscally. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we are going to be sitting down with one of the folks that I've really enjoyed. I make it sound like the list is short. Maybe it's not as long as I wish it was. But no, one of the guys I've really enjoyed crossing paths with during my time in the brewing industry. And we're going to jump into some stuff on the financial side, on the accounting side. I've been getting more and more questions about doing your own thing, as far as either going pro or opening your own business, starting or purchasing a brewery that you would like to operate. I've had a lot of questions coming in like that, and it tracks with. If you're in some of these groups on Facebook and whatnot, these used equipment groups, these brewery and planning groups, this stuff's really popping off. So we're going to be digging into that a little bit today. But let's jump right into it. Welcome to Adam Makes Beer podcast. Check out Spotify, Apple Podcast, or however you listen to podcasts and see all of the long form brewer interviews that we've done. After you subscribe, please leave a review and comment as well, because it really helps support the work I'm doing. Also, if you are new to the channel or podcast, go to Adam Makes Beer on YouTube, click the playlist tab, and see tons of info, brew days, techniques, tutorials, now over 800 videos. As always, if you're getting value out of this content, please follow, rate, like, comment, and share with your brewing friends and craft beer enthusiast homies. And if you have the means and feel as if my content has benefited you, consider a channel membership for $2.99 a month. It gives you priority for Q&A, live stream questions, and just the nice warm feeling that you toss a few bucks my way, or drop a super chat tip in the comments or chat. But as always, that's always if you have the extra scratch, folks. People, we all know what the YouTube thing is, what the podcast thing is. If you've got the scratch or something like that, that's great. And if you don't, it is not a big deal. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Starting a brewery is a big step. That's why Blickman Engineering is here to support you along the way. Since 2006, they've been helping hundreds of breweries across the nation succeed with nano brewery tailored equipment, including the new 3.5 barrel Pro Surface electric brewing system. This new innovative brew house reduces maintenance and saves brewers at least 30 minutes every brew day, as the submersible elements are now mounted under the kettle and host over 2,000 watts of power in both 2-vessel and 3-vessel configurations. Their competitively priced equipment lets you start fresh, offering a full suite of brew houses from 1 to 15 barrels, matching cellaring equipment, keg washers, grain mills, and accessories specifically for the nano brewer. Get ready to go pro, or just exploring options? Contact Phil or Tom at ProSeries@BlickmanEngineering.com. Again, that's ProSeries@BlickmanEngineering.com, as they can get you up and running quickly for a faster ROI. As I mentioned before, we have the great and powerful David Lentz on the. You're not on the phone. I was about to say on the phone. Is that where the age starts showing, David?
If it makes you feel better, I actually am on my phone.
Well, well, it is one of those things.
So it's come full circle.
Right? Yeah. Well, when I think about it, people my age and older will still sometimes say that they taped something.
Yep.
Like they took some footage, they taped it. There's a timestamp on saying that. You know what I mean? There's people of a certain age don't say
the
taped.
very tail end of my childhood. So yeah.
Yeah, that was the prime of my childhood, Dave. It was all pirating music in one way or another. Did you ever have the no, you are too I'm going to assume you're too young for this. When I was a kid, we used to have what I assume is called the boombox, two
Yep.
tape decks, and then you could hit record on one and try to record a song off the radio, and then hope it didn't go to commercial before the song finished all the way out. September and June in the chat is calling out Napster. That was a light years ahead. David, were you even alive for Napster?
I was part of the LimeWire era. So
LimeWire, baby.
About the same time, I think.
That was probably one of the largest malware explosions, I'm assuming. Was around that time when everybody's just downloading all these files.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, I'm excited that we're able to set up a time to chat. As I mentioned in some of the intro, I feel like in some way, shape, or form, we've been hearing the stuff out of the Brewers Association, and last year, do you remember off the top of your head were the openings and closings numbers about level last year?
I believe openings were still a tick higher, but it was the first year closings started to catch up with it.
Yeah. Do you think it's gonna lap it this year?
Oh, great question. The reason I think so many stayed open was all the free COVID money that we all got as part of it all. So as that money kind of dried up, if you didn't fix your operational problems throughout that time period, there's definitely a chance that number keeps ticking up. I think the industry is just changing in general, though, where you're seeing less and less regional breweries and more local town breweries.
Yeah.
And I think having that local town aspect, people like to support their local bar. So as long as you give a good environment, a good time, I'm not as pessimistic as others on the decline of the brewing industry, as long as people are doing it right in their local communities.
Sure. I think that's interesting too, because, and we've talked about it on here before, but for a long time, we've been talking about how competitive those shelf spaces are, how competitive tap handle real estate is. And it seems like some of the larger trend stuff that we're seeing may be hitting some bigger people a little bit more than, maybe like smaller pub type units like you were referencing before.
Yeah. To the common person going to the grocery store, you can see the decline in shelf space for sure.
Yeah.
Calling it my local Giant Eagle, it used to be the whole shelf, and then it became a half a shelf. Now it's a quarter of a shelf.
It's changed too, because the first hit was when they started buying up, when the kind of the big three started buying up craft brands, and then those craft brands, the Bud Miller Coors owned craft brands started growing into that space. And it was the same way at Meyer in Big Rapids back when I lived in Michigan. That shelf space got smaller and smaller and smaller. And the last time I was in town and I walked by, it's a pretty small sliver these days. It's a pretty small sliver.
So one thing we always talked about at Saucy was it's not necessarily, we don't need to really win new shelf space per se, but keep the shelf space that we had.
Sure.
Because like I said, I think it's all trend based. I think in 3 to 5 years, the vodka seltzers and sodas will all start to trickle away again, and beer will come back. Sure. So if you're strongly positioned in 3 to 5 years with that already, then I think you're off to the races again.
Yeah, and there has been some. There was a period of time where people were saying, hard cider was going to kill craft beer, and different things like that. I think it's going to be interesting to see what sticks, because I do think whether you're talking like the RTDs or the seltzer products, or even hazy IPA and some trending toward lighter lagers now. I do think people want some things that are approachable, drinkable, right? And we're kind of seeing that we're kind of seeing that as one of the big trends.
Yep, sure,
definitely. Well, David, I'm trying to think. So I've talked to equipment folks, I've talked to brewers, I've talked to lab people. You are going to be the first, kind of operation business side person that I run into. So I'm going
Sure.
to ask both your patience and my listeners' patience. When
Sure.
I ask, I'm going to ask some questions or some clarification questions that maybe people are going to be saying, this guy should know this answer. How has he ever owned a home? Different things like that. But yeah, so I appreciate your patience with me. But I think the good thing is some of the very basic stuff that I ask there, I'm probably not the only person out there wondering about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sure.
So
For sure.
so let's jump into it a little bit. Now, I'm assuming what was your path into the industry?
Sure.
Into
So
the
I
beer
guess sure.
related type thing, right?
Yeah. So my background, I worked at Grant Thornton for almost 7 years there as an auditor.
Okay.
As I was kind of working my way up the food chain, I started to realize that while I really enjoyed auditing, as I became a manager on my way to senior manager, the actual auditing work kind of went away. That I became just more of a manager, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't love that aspect of the auditing job as much. I like being in the field. I like going to see clients every day. I realized I was a people person
Sure.
when it came to the audit style. So I wanted to, as I was working on to find my exit out of Grant Thornton, I wanted to find a job that aligned with one of my hobbies. And from the time I turned 21, my dad had got me into craft beer almost right away.
Yeah.
That I kind of narrowed my list down to it was a beer company, a sports company, or the zoo was the other one I interviewed for that I really enjoyed. But it just so happened that the saucy job became available. I hit it off, I think, with the management team and the ownership team there. Yeah. And I think it was really, really just a great fit where it kind of combined, like I said, my background in auditing, accounting, et cetera, with my passion for the industry. And I think it really just helped set me off on that trajectory to saucy.
Definitely. And I do think, so let me ask this question, and maybe there's a bit of a stereotype like toward introversion or something like that. The fact that you like explaining things to people, is that something that is a little bit uncommon, like within your field?
I would say so. Also, we're talking about stereotypes. I would say the stereotype in the accounting firms is definitely between audit and tax. That the auditors are more of the social ones. We're the ones who go out to the clients more. Tax is the stereotype of they sit behind the computer and just kind of type away and account away.
Yeah.
So audit was always the right path based on my personality and the ability to go visit clients and be customer facing. That we had a pretty good mix, I think. That we all kind of at Grant Thornton, we all kind of fell into the right path for us to make the right decisions and kind of get the right group together.
Sure. And we'll dig into some of these things a little bit more as we go. But what's kind of a skill set or talent that you feel as if you bring to the table that's really served you well?
I think it's the ability to work with different groups of people, set firm, hard deadlines, set expectations as they are, but still be able to be a personable human when it comes to those kind of things.
How do you do that? Because I think there's a lot of people. I have that issue myself. With some personality types, it's easier than others.
Sure.
But can you think of like either an example or just like a way that you get that done? Because that's not always an easy conversation.
Sure. No, I agree. I guess so full circle, I guess, to round out my background. Full-time, I was at Saucy full-time for 4 years. So now I think a good example of what you asked is that now me transitioning to my full-time day-to-day 9-to-5 role at my new company. That at Saucy, I was the manager of the department with nobody underneath of me. I was the sole accountant for all of the companies with Saucy. Now at this company, I have an accounting team again. And it's really just trying to build those relationships one-on-one with each of your team members. Set expectations up front. Let them know who you are, what you stand for. Build that really deep relationship to kind of find out what makes them tick as well. So that way you can use that as a motivator to, on the good side and the bad side, to get better results, to give better rewards, but to also inspire better performance by using that tick to get them there.
Sure.
But like I said, all relationships ship based. It's really about just building those deep connections with your team.
No, I'm a really big I'm a really big believer. I'm a big believer in that, and I do think though that sometimes the tough thing can be is there's there's a line between saying, okay, I'm going to have a quality connection with somebody on my team, and I want to be friends with the people on my
Sure.
team. And there's
Yep.
nothing wrong with being friends with people on your team, right? But there is like there can be, I don't know, I think especially in the brewing side of things,
Yep.
and especially with you having your toes and those waters for some years, it can be difficult, especially if you're hanging out after shift,
Oh yeah. Very
having a
much so.
shift beer,
Yep.
and you have various people from different levels management wise in the company.
Yep.
Things can get tricky, man.
So I always told this to one of the team members at Saucy. I always told her that, we're really good work friends,
Yeah,
but it's okay to say we're not real life friends. That I like to draw that line at work. That
yeah,
and I love hanging out with you at work. I think we have really good conversations. I think we have a great working relationship. But let's call it, we can be really good work friends. I don't want that to carry over into our personal life just because for a myriad of reasons. That good, bad, and different. I think if you draw that line, it makes having those tough conversations a little easier because you're not personally involved outside of work with them.
yeah. And you can still actually, like, be yourself, be a
Yeah.
good person, right? Yeah, so you can
Yep.
do those things, right? Yeah.
But when you make
That's
it that relationship from 8 to 5, it makes it easier to cut it off and have just business conversations too than carrying that on from 5 to 10, where it becomes
you
more and more personal as time goes.
Yeah, you'd never shared that with me before. I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting. I did an interview. I did a podcast with the Modern Brewer podcast. Chris, I'm gonna forget his last name, but anyways, great guy. He has some great content over there. So everybody at home, if you haven't checked out the Modern Brewer podcast, you should. And one of the things he said is he said, because he was the last brewery he was in before he took the job he has now, they would go out for a shift. They would, go out to the bar for a shift beer.
Sure.
And he said that, every time the conversation shifted toward talking about the management, he said, I finished my pint, grabbed my jacket, and I said
Yep.
goodnight.
Yep. Yeah. Like I said, you got to draw the line somewhere. So yeah, absolutely. I get
Well,
it.
it's tough, and you also don't want to be creating that situation where people feel as if, like, if you have a legitimate workplace issue, like if you have a conflict with another person, necessarily like bringing it up to other people after shift is not necessarily, even if it is your manager, right? So especially like when people have been drinking,
Yep.
things can get a little wonky.
Yep.
But
I'll say, and that as part of my role at Saucy, I also HR was kind of also under that umbrella of, I'll call it the corporate services team.
sure.
That I made that very clear with kitchen staff and bartenders that once I had a beer in my hand, we were not talking about any HR items.
Yeah.
I don't, because there's just so much risk that you're going to say something inappropriate when someone's already hot and heavy for an HR issue.
Sure.
Once the beer's in your hand, you got to cut it off. I think when it comes to that kind of stuff, for sure.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And I didn't realize that you had some HR capacity as well then.
I did.
And
Mostly transactional. I'll call it.
Sure.
Between myself and one of the owners, we did a pretty good job splitting up the duties. He kind of oversaw the bigger pictures. I did the day-to-day payroll, hiring, firing, etc. Kind of transactional items. So yeah.
Sure. So when you started with Saucy, what were the areas that you really had to grow, or like either to grow into the role, either professionally, personally? Like what was that like? Or did you already
Sure.
have experience in all the things you were asked to do there?
So definitely grow. I guess a couple different things. That being an auditor, it's very easy to go and look at someone's accounting records and say, "Oh, you're wrong. Here's why. Here's A, B, C, and D. They didn't match. We audited it. We found these errors. Go book the debit credit entry to make it balance again."
Yep.
When you're the one actually doing the debiting and crediting and building the schedules to support the balances that you have, it's just a different muscle that you have to learn how to flex. Auditing was much more theoretical of, this is how it should be. You need to go do that yourself. all that got flipped onto me was, as I walked into Saucy, was, well, no one's going to tell you anymore. You have to go figure out the debits and credits. You need to take ownership of that accounting software. I had to learn the whole HR function. That was never part of my role before.
What was the accounting software you were using?
We did QuickBooks Online.
QuickBooks Online.
And,
okay.
And I would recommend that to every small business out there, brewery, restaurant, even those non in the service industry. It's so easy to use. For any small business, I think it's right there. It has everything you could possibly need to run an effective small business.
Sure. Okay, so we were talking about when you were coming into Saucy, so you ended up kind of splitting up some of those HR things. Yep. Was this more of a situation where was there any skills or any skill acquisition that needed to come into place, or any growth, like when it came to, like full disclosure, so everybody, when David and I have worked together in the past, when Saucy purchased Cartridge when I was brewing there, and so you had a situation there where that purchase had happened, and then there's a set of managers at that company already, right? Yep. And so, sweet Amanda, wherever she is right now, she's probably working her tail off in the back of house or front of house right now. But yeah, how is that coming into a new situation and having somebody like either a GM or a brewery manager that's been doing something that way, and you're going to pretty much change a lot of things? How does that work, and how do you make that successful?
Sure. So like you said, there were a lot of things that we thought we should change, a lot of things we thought we shouldn't change, a lot of things, yada, yada, yada. At the end of the day, the reason we kept the team that we did in place for as long as we possibly could until somebody left us. Adam.
That feels like a finger point, but
it was. We could just tell you that you were all so passionate about what you did. You wanted to learn more. Everyone there had that knack of, they wanted to be better at what they did, and they wanted to learn more. They wanted to and I hope we also gave that same effect, where we wanted to learn more, and we wanted to learn what you guys did well. And I think just really getting to know the team and see how passionate you guys were about what you had built up to that point in your each individual roles, I think it left us really encouraged that there were a lot of good things at Cartridge that we could all work towards together.
Sure. So before we dive too far into the Cartridge stuff, because I know I'm sure we're going to be bouncing back to some of that stuff as we go. Sure. So you're with Saucy for 4 years?
Yep.
And then do you also have a role with OCBA?
I do. So I believe I was on the finance committee for 2 years.
Okay.
I worked pretty closely with the finance chair to work on their budgets, worked with Mary there to kind of review budgets, review some strategic things around the Distributor Rights Act or whatever that is called now.
Yeah.
But really helping her set the budget for that. But yeah, the finance committee was really just a way for me to continue to get deeper involved in the industry, to meet more contacts who have that financial mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, 4 years at Saucy. I started the week right before COVID shut the world down.
Yeah. Oh, wow, really?
So I started
that's crazy.
March 9th of 2020. And I got to work for 1 week. We had all these growth plans, expansion plans. And then all of a sudden, within a week of my life, voluntarily, I went from auditing billion-dollar companies to making pizzas within 1 week of my life. So crazy timing. But I think a lot of things that we'll talk about today, I think that's what makes me more effective in my role, was that time period where I got to work in the kitchen. I'm sure we'll talk about it as we get to it. But it was, when you talk about food costs, labor costs, portioning, costing, menu pricing, I got to see that David's handful of cheese, how David likes his pizza, was not an appropriate food cost pizza. So being hands-on, saying, okay, well, I had to learn this skill. If I can do it, and I had to make a pizza at 30% food cost, I know you can too, chef.
Yeah.
Chef, if I can figure it out, I know it's possible. So
for sure.
It was a great learning experience. And like I said, it kind of helped that transition from just being an auditor and saying, oh, you did this wrong, or okay, we looked at everything, sign off. It really got me involved in the operation side of the business. I got to help can beer quite a bit during that time, which really just help me understand the brewing process. It was just a great transition through that time.
Yeah, man, that's an interesting that's a crazy transition, because I mean we all had different, a different experience work wise. Some people just, some people work from home, some people got laid off, you know what I mean? But and I think for a lot of businesses, craft beer or not, some of the ones that were fortunate enough to survive figured out ways to, I mean, the word back then was pivot, right? You know what I mean? People sliding into different roles and just getting things done. So you had 4 years with Saucy, and then now I know that you have started Brewed Fiscally.
I have.
What can you tell me about that, man?
Yeah, so it was. So I have left Saucy from a full-time capacity to now a part-time capacity. Okay. That precipice being, my wife is from the Toledo area. I always promised her once we had our first daughter, we'd move back. I was 2 years late. We had baby number 2 on the way. Yeah. So I figured it was time to fulfill that promise. So unfortunately, I had to make the move away from Saucy. Sure. I love everything we built. And I'm glad I got to stay involved as part of that on a part-time basis going forward. Yeah. But with that being said, I also knew I wanted to stay connected in the industry one way or another. We had a couple of ex-employees from Saucy who went on to start their own restaurants and breweries and other things as well. And they had, even before I left, they had started asking to see if I could do their accounting for them, their books and records, kind of behind the scenes. Knowing the scale of those businesses, I knew it wouldn't be a lot of work. So thankfully, the Saucy ownership team let me do that. Even while I was working at Saucy, kind of starting to brew Fiscally from nothing to have 2 or 3 clients.
Sure.
And now, while I'm still a part-time at Saucy, I kind of use Saucy to help me grow Brewed Fiscally, kind of that network through that. But yeah, it was really just a way for me to kind of stay in the industry as we made that move out here in Toledo. And I've loved every second of it so far.
So when is baby number 2 is not here right now, right?
Not yet. Middle of October.
Middle of October. Oh, David, I'm excited for you, man. I'm excited for you. That's it's a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing. One of my coworkers, he and his wife are having their first, and I'm just excited for him, because I don't know, man. It's one of those things that definitely forms who you are.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely forms who you are. So that's interesting. So you have a day job, correct?
I have a day job. Yep.
Have a day job, and Brewed Fiscally is something like it falls into, the side hustle side.
I'll call it side hustle. Yep.
Side hustle.
If one day I have enough people who want to work with me and I can make it a full-time thing, absolutely love to do that. Sure. But for right now, it's been a side hustle just because I enjoy helping out people with their back office work. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's been interesting for me too, because obviously, what I'm doing here is a side hustle as well. But it is something where it's obviously work, but I also love doing it too. I went back. Right. YouTube just changed some settings for a content creator or whatever. And so it started automatically filing some live streams into some podcast. Nothing changed, but it was just showing me something different. And so I looked at an old, one of the first live streams I did, and I'm like, this is going to be terrible. Get ready to be embarrassed. Yep. So now not that the camera and audio and everything is great now. So the one I looked at, it was old iPhone headphones, jack plugged into the computer. Yep. That was my mic. And the light were super bad. But the funny thing is I still look I look and talk the same way. It was interesting to see it's still just me being excited about talking about crap that I'm excited about, right?
Exactly.
And now maybe one could hope that my presentation skills would be increase in polish, but I'm not there yet.
But maybe.
But but yeah, so that's cool. And so what is some of the range of service that you do with Brewed Fiscally?
Yeah, so really my whole goal is to take, I'll call it day-to-day cash management from your bank, sort those transactions into QuickBooks, give you a month-end P&L, and kind of set up what we deem together as the important KPIs, key performance indicators. So
Okay.
as I referenced with my food costs, with my hand of pizza and talking about cartridge food costs and what have you, food costs for us was always one of the biggest KPIs, key performance indicators, because it's one of the very controllable costs.
Yeah.
You can change it based on recipe, menu, whatever. So really setting up QuickBooks and bank transactions to make it easy for brewery owners, brewery managers to get that in an easy to read dashboard without having to get into all the details of every single invoice, every single transaction. My goal is to turn over a P&L, say, hey, based on industry standards, your food cost is too high, too low, right on. Your labor cost is too high, too low, perfect. Yep. And kind of give you my vantage point of where I think you can improve things or how you optimize that business.
Sure.
For some breweries, I do some inputting of payroll, some sales tax filings, some year-end tax filings. Really, my whole goal is, and I think you mentioned this, that you guys are, everyone in the brewing industry is just such a master of their craft, of making great beer, making great food, and that seems to be the sole focus for a lot of breweries who start breweries. My whole goal is to kind of make that back office function easier for you as you continue to grow and scale and really hone in your processes.
And it isn't something, I mean, gosh, I've been doing it long enough where you don't want to say that the beer and the food doesn't matter. That's, or you know what I mean? But if I were going to be doing my own thing with a snap of the fingers, right? Okay, sure. Adam's going to have his own brewery tomorrow, and I had to rank order the things that I would want to be absolutely stellar on.
Yep.
I would, probably my systems, my systems and my accounting side stuff is the stuff that I really, you know what I mean? Like,
but you said a lot of people don't think of that. They go into the brewing industry because they are a really good home brewer. They had a really good experience brewing at a bigger brewery. They want to try their own thing. That's not always that's not, I guess it's always the focus, but it's never top of mind for a lot of these people starting out.
Well, and you know, the reality is there is a time where that worked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like where you could get in, have a cool looking spot and have beer that might, you know what I mean? I don't know, but those days it's more competitive out there now.
Yeah.
You know, with the number of places and everything like that. And that's kind of, it's kind of been a shift for me too, as I've been doing this channel and getting the types of questions and feedback I get. You know, the more and more I find myself pushing into the operations side of things. Sure. You know what I mean? Because beer knowledge is great, and I still have, you know, a thirst for that, but it's I feel like an area where I can potentially really have value for people, as well as is putting them in touch with, you know, people that can help to answer some of those important things. Now, you mentioned something earlier. And I've done, like I said, I've done a fair amount of research over the years. There's a podcast that I like listening to where there's a ton of it, and it's called Restaurant Unstoppable. Okay. And he goes around and interviews. This guy lives like he like lives in a camper, and he drives all over the country interviewing independent restaurant owners.
Sure.
And there's some great content in there. And one of the things I remember hearing a long time ago, they had a restaurant owner on there, and they were talking about how most people use their P&L, or their profit and loss statement. And they were talking about, you know, so many places they know they don't look at a P&L until 6 months later, until 3 months later, 9 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And then they use the phrase, it's good to track a P&L, but it's also driving by looking in the rear view mirror.
Yep.
All right. What let me know what you think about that.
So to that point, that's what I like most about what I do. My goal is to make sure you have month-end financial statements within 7 days of month-end.
Yeah.
That's what I've promised all my clients, because you're right. If it's starting to go out too far, any decisions that you want to make based on that feedback of the numbers, it just postpones any actual decisions you can make or any action items you can have. So if you're only looking at it every 6 to 12 months, then I mean, at that point, it could be too late if something's wrong. It could be a death nail if you're not paying attention to it close enough. And again, I think a lot of these small business owners, because they're masters of their craft, not necessarily masters of business planning and evaluations and what have you. It's, does my bank account balance go up or down? That's kind of the guide. But there's deeper meanings to why it's doing that. And I think the P&L, if we set it up right and get those KPIs set up correctly, then we'll see those right away and be able to action item those into pluses or minuses.
Interesting. So this is a theme that we've kind of touched on a little bit, but let's dive a little bit further into this. I think sometimes people neglect the fact that they're operating a restaurant when they open a brewery. What are the key metrics people need to be tracking from the financial side of things? Yep.
So, like you said, we definitely talked about food costs, labor costs. Those are for sure the two most controllable items that you have. Like as I mentioned with food, it's you pick the portions, you pick the recipe that goes into that. You have to make sure you then mark it up at the right price, so your margin on the back end is an appropriate margin concerning all your other costs. Labor, same thing. Labor is the tricky one because you want to make sure you have enough staff to give a good guest experience and make it pleasant for everybody. But again, it's the one where you can control it based on how many heads you have on staff that night, how many tables you want each staff to cover, and kind of metric it out the right way to make sure you're trying your best to be always appropriately staffed. But knowing as a good operator, you have to be able to dynamically manage that as you go throughout the day as well.
Sure. And I know you've been attached to projects that offer different levels of dining experience, from like sit down to fast casual. What are some of your thoughts on those models, and either successes or struggles with that? What's your thought? Because it's a pretty big concept. I mean, these days there's a lot of places you can go in, you scan the code, you can order from your table. Or there's no servers, or there's full-on servers. First of all, personally, what do you like? What's the place that do you like to sit at a table and have a server come up?
As a consumer, I'm very much a bar sitter. I like to go sit at the bar. I think for me, what I enjoy is the quick service of being there. They take your order right away. They get your drink right away. It's easy.
Sure.
So generally speaking, to answer your question, what I would prefer as a consumer is somewhere where I don't really have to interact with a lot of people. Because if I'm going out, I really just want to spend time with my family, friends, whoever we're out with. That being said, having the servers and more bartenders and waitresses and hosts and what have you, while a bigger dollar expense on an hourly basis, I think there's also something to be said about the potential upsells that you get with them. That especially in the brewery space, it's very easy for a server to say, "Oh, you really enjoyed that beer? Here's a 6-pack to take home with you."
Sure.
And if you brought it over to my table, I probably would just buy it because you brought it there already. I like the beer, and why would I say no?
Yeah.
So it's like the personal touch is very important, I think, as well. And I think that's what really helps a lot of businesses succeed, is having that personal touch from the server, waitress, bartender, who really makes you feel comfortable at your spot there.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Cheers growing up? It would have been probably reruns for you.
Cheers. It was during COVID. It was one of our bedtime shows. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Well, and it's kind of cliche, but I really do think people just genuinely want the comfortable place where the service is going to be right. Like, I don't know. I feel like the atmosphere and everything. Sometimes I wonder how easy it is to achieve that in a quick service, in a quick service way. Now, I know that there are places that do it well, but I think that it's potentially easier to do that with more service staff. But as you mentioned, from a business standpoint, you're talking about people managing one, people developing, and then obviously labor costs and everything like that as well.
Yeah. And I think, so, I mean, you were still a cartridge as we did that transition to and from that, right? So it's really just listening to your customer, what they want. That at Saucy, we had always had the quick service model. You order at the bar, you get a pizza brought to your table. That's about all the human interaction you have with the staff. At Cartridge, it was different. You guys were always full server for full staff. And I think that just even the way the spaces are set up, I think Cartridge lends itself more to having servers.
Sure.
And we missed that as part of the transition. And we listened. We listened to the customers. We listened to our staff. Yep. And it was an uphill battle for us to say we were wrong. But sure. I'm glad that Cartridge went back to having the server style, because that's what the community wants. That was what was effective there. That's what had people come back and stay longer and enjoy their dinner more, because they had that personal touch at the table.
Well, and I tell you what, though, it's a big in from my vantage point, it's a tip of the hat. I mean, anytime somebody says, "Hey, this is the decision that I'm making, and we're going to roll with this," and then saying, "You know what, I think we should go back to doing something like we were before." I think that's one of those. I think that's a trust building thing for people. You know what I mean? To admit, hey, this is not going the way we thought, but we're nimble enough to be able to roll back to something that might work better.
Sure. Yeah, I'll say. I'm a big quick service guy, so it took a lot for me to be convinced and be okay with going back. Mm-hmm. But Amanda was so persistent that she was right, we were wrong, and she got to us, and she was right. So
I forgot to add to the list of Amanda descriptors of persistent. That's a good one. I might have some other ones I could fit in there too, but we'll stick with persistent. Yep. She's so funny, man. But before I derail this too much, I know we were talking about various metrics to track, yep. And we talked about food and beer, yep. Consumables, basically. Now, so here's a question specifically, like on the brewing side.
Yep.
I know there's a lot of brewers that have the mindset, and this is from a pub standpoint, not like big going out the door production. Yep. I think it's pretty common for brewers to say, I should be able to buy whatever malt that I want for this beer because it's so cheap to make this anyways.
Sure.
I know you're a numbers guy, but what's your gut on that? What's your gut on that?
So I would say, in our kind of credo always was, if you're serving it over the bar, that's fine.
Uh-huh.
That because the margins are so high over the bar, that's fine. Do whatever you want. If you're putting it in distribution, that changes, because
100%.
What we sell a 6-pack to the distributor for is what we sell the price of 1 pint over the bar is.
Mm-hmm.
So really, you're multiplying that cost by 6.
Yeah.
With the can, the label, with the extra liquid, the pack tax.
Yeah.
It becomes just a math equation where it doesn't work when you're not trying to optimize what you're doing. Sure. But yeah, if you're making a pub beer and you want to throw gallons of fruit in it, and you want to throw whatever the most expensive hops are, get some New Zealand hops in, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
But you have to have a good balance, and I think you start to learn as you build out any draft list, any set of beer tank farm backup. You'll have some more expensive beers. You're gonna have some cheaper beers. It's just having a good balance, I think, throughout your draft list and throughout the costing exercise.
Yep. So when we were talking costing and different things like that, this is a little bit more beer centric. But are you in the different breweries handle things different ways? This is going to sound terrible. I have no idea what beer costs at Sonder, because I mean, first of all, I can get a free shift beer, but I can't drink the beer there anyways because of my gluten sensitivity. So, but I know they have different series of beer. So they have like green series, gold series. Some places have, it's flat $7. Everything's $7. The imperial stuff might come in a 10-ounce glass, but that's $7. What's your thought on that? Is it worthwhile to price beers strictly according to like margin, or just flat line it with everything? What are your takes on that?
So we tried to do both at Saucy for a while.
Uh-huh.
We went down both paths. I think at the end of the day, I think having a dynamic pricing is probably more effective, and it feels more transparent to the customer.
And by dynamic pricing, you mean
That $5 for a lager, 6 for an IPA, 7 for a hazy, and 8
sure,
for a stout. That
sure,
I think that's kind of what it feels like the customer has been trained to expect.
mm-hmm.
That if you can provide, and I think they understand the increased costs, because at least I don't want to say the average craft beer consumer, because that's probably not even true, but the one who's excited about the stout won't blink an eye at $8 for a stout, because he has that expectation of what it's going to be a better, heavier, more flavorful beer because of everything you put into it.
Sure.
So as
sure.
long as you're hitting the taste expectations that go with that price point, the people who are looking for that kind of have that mindset already of what they're going to get what they pay for.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that. So you did mention, okay, so, because I know Saucy's light lager, the light Mexican lager, was called what?
El Lager.
El Lager, that's right. So you did play with dropping price point on El Lager.
We did.
And then did you see benefit to that in the tap room?
It's hard to say, because I think because that was our light beer option, it was always going to be the best seller.
Yeah, man.
That's
What
a non-beer drinker likes to get. So
sure.
Yes and no. That it's hard to drive a direct correlation, I guess, just to price, because that being the light beer, that's what people kind of tend to lean towards anyways.
Sure. Just even ballpark in the tap room, is El Lager on year round at the tap room?
While I was there, yes. I know there's been some beer calendar changes since.
Sure.
That I'm not necessarily privy to now in my role, but yes, for all intents and purposes, that was the Saucy light lager for the year.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that was that had to rank pretty high in the, as far as the top beers sold in the tap room, right?
Number one seller almost every week.
Yeah, isn't that funny? And because we spend so much, that's one of the things that I think about more and more, is we sometimes I feel like we could I don't know, for so long we thought that we hated the blonde ale that we had to make as brewers, right? Sure. It was like, oh, this is one I have to make for people, blah 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 blah.
Yep.
I think though, like my mindset has kind of changed on it. Like if you were to say, all right, Adam, what's the number one, you have to put a pub list together. The first thing I would do is I would put together essentially an adjunct lager. So an adjunct lager builds small beer, something that's going to be 4%, something that's going to be 10 IBU. And I would ferment it cool with American ale yeast. And I would flip that thing so fast compared to lager strain, right? Because the reality is that beer going to be the same thing? No, you don't have to call it a lager. You could call it your brewery X light. You know what I mean? It is a light beer, but you'll be able to flip that tank easy 2 times, at least 2 times as often, right? And it just makes things a little bit easier to handle from a production standpoint. And sometimes it's one of those things where I think where brewers can go wrong is we have something in our head about how we want something to be, and it's special because it's this thing, but it also makes it a lot harder to produce. And sometimes at the end of the day, it's like, hey, listen, most people that are coming here to drink this beer that has a lime slammed in it, they're just coming in to have a good time and have a beer, man. They're not worried about whether it's lagered or not. You know what I mean? If you're talking about your big number one beer, let's try to make it you want to make it tasty, crushable, balanced, all those things, but let's make it as efficiently as possible, right?
Sure.
Have you ever had to have conversations with clients about stuff like that? Like, do you go that far into production stuff, or is it really just sticking on the number side?
I'll say at Saucy, I would be involved in those conversations for sure. And this with just specifically Brewed Fiscally clients, I have not had those conversations yet.
Sure.
More than happy to, though, as they see the need.
Sure.
The one I work with down in Hudson, I think he just does a great job brewing. I think he's worked in the kind of similar to you. He's kind of been a lifelong brewer where he just kind of he understands that background stuff.
Sure.
Where if he has questions, I'll try my best to answer. But I think at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily a brewer by trade. So having you guys have that knowledge, I think, to kind of better talk about flipping tanks faster and still making it taste good while hitting all the right specs.
Sure.
I can only add so much value other than saying, yeah, if you can make a beer taste as good, you can flip it twice as fast. Yeah, you should do that.
Sure. So you mentioned before when we were kind of talking about managing controllable costs, and we were talking about food, and obviously there's bleed over into beer. What is can you dive into that a little bit for me? Because I think the obvious thing on the food side is to say, oh, well, let's just buy cheaper ingredients, right? Sure. I mean, that's like the really obvious thing. But practically, what are some things that people can do on that raw material side that can, because nobody wants to have to say, all right, we're cutting quality in order to hit our financial marks, right? So
because the customer is not dumb, they see through
100%. Yeah.
When you serve a less quality pizza because you try to buy a cheaper cheese or use less cheese, people see right through that, and that ends up hurting you in a different way because then they don't come back. They had a bad experience. They don't like that anymore. So yeah, it's definitely a fine line. That I'll say there's always some flex to the quote unquote rules, right? That yes, I will tell all my clients 30% food cost, bright line.
Sure.
But a company like Cartridge, we fluctuate up and below and above that line based on the month, based on the specials they ran. It was about different promotions they wanted to have because they thought it was going to have better customer retention.
Sure.
So there's got to be some give and take where during Burger Week, we know we're going to sell that burger. We still want to serve our high quality burger, but we know we're going to sell it at a 70% food cost because Burger Week's a $7 event.
Yeah.
So you only have so much flex because of that event, but you're going to drive a lot of business based on that. So yeah, you took a hit on the burger, but hopefully that customer sticks around for 2 beers, 3 beers, and they tell a friend about how good it was and how great the experience was. And it's a different kind of marketing.
I remember Burger Week last year when I was there, they just got smashed. And I think I talked to Josh just the other day, and I think you're either gearing up for or something like that, or they're in the middle of it.
You know the Cincinnati market better than I do, but I think it's right about now.
Yeah.
There's always some kind of week. I know in Cleveland, Pizza Week is huge. So Saucy is always part of Pizza Week, and we would take a hit on the pizzas, but we know for sure people were going to sit around and hang out at the bar more and get more drinks because of it. So it stinks on that one pizza that we didn't make our money.
Definitely.
But it hopefully introduces new customers, and that margin on the beer should help cover that cost.
Yeah. What about dipping into the labor side of things? I mean, there might be some obvious ones here, but what are some of the biggest enemies of company profitability when it comes to labor?
Scheduling for what you think it will be, and then not managing as it is.
Okay, can you dip into that a little bit for me?
So said differently, if you have a normal Saturday where you typically staff 5 people to cover a $10,000 night, that sounds great. And it's hypothetical numbers. I know without getting into details in dollars. Hypothetical numbers: 5 people to cover a $10,000 night on the floor. If you're trending towards 5, 6, 7 o'clock, and you see that's not happening, the revenue is not coming in that day for whatever reason. It's raining. It's just a slow night. Having people stand around and not dynamically saying, "Okay, it's time to cut labor. It's time we need to get people off the floor." Not dynamically managing as you go throughout the night is what really gets you.
Sure.
And I think it goes back to how do you have that management style to manage around it, and I think the GMs they need to have that relationship with the staff to have them understand. Yeah, sure, you might be cut tonight, but you'll be the last cut next time. We'll make up your hours in a different way.
Sure.
One thing I think that Cartridge does really well is they cross train all their employees front of house, back of house. So
I think that's pretty slick, man.
Can pick up hours in the back if they got cut too early one night, and I think that's a great way to kind of help keep all staff engaged, all happy, and kind of be able to all get their hours in different ways if it doesn't hit the targets that we want to hit for the revenue.
Sure. No, I think I do think that's a big thing. I remember the last time I talked to Amanda, she was mentioning the volume of cross training that they have there.
Yeah.
And it just offers you, it offers you such flexibility.
Sure.
And it's obviously a benefit to them as well. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It creates more ways that they can pick up hours and earn money.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
and we keep using cartridge as the example, I guess, just the disclaimer to everyone out there. Cartridge, because Adam and I both work there for the same time, and it's easy to talk about the same people and same processes and shared experiences. So
definitely.
I feel like I give examples about any of my clients, but because of that common knowledge, cartridge just seems to be the easiest one to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. So when a place is getting ready to open, when we're kind of talking about the whole labor aspect, how do you try to approach that? Do you have a different set of expectations for labor hours when you're freshly opening your doors?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think with anything, there's a lot of trial and error. That even though when you're opening your doors, those first couple batches, you might be sending down the drain too.
Sure.
Trying to get the right pattern, the right staffing cycles, the right coverage over the busy time lapse. It takes time to get dialed in.
Yeah.
That with anything, there's, like I said, trial and error, but I think that's what kind of makes a better business is you learn as you go. And that's why it's so important to have those P&Ls readily available for you to make those decisions as quickly as you can.
Are there, I think that there's some softwares out there, some software apps, what have you, that kind of give the GM kind of a general idea of what they're tracking from labor to sales, and everything like that. I'm trying to remember what they're using there. Are they using Toast?
Yeah, so I'll say I think Toast is the best POS system there is out there.
Uh-huh.
It's a really, really good mousetrap. Anything you possibly want from a restaurant management side, they have as part of their package. Labor management being one of them. You can see that real labor percent at all times for the hourly staff and track your rates based on that. There's a whole set of software behind it that goes with it to really help you manage the whole restaurant. But yeah, I love Toast, and I think that does a great thing. It's a great package to really hone in on the details that you need to get.
This is something that I feel like people forget about sometimes is what software they're going to be using, and everything like that. From a cost standpoint, like, what do you think is a reasonable range if you're just talking about a pub, so a place that does make some measure of food, and makes their own beer and sells it on premise? What should someone be expecting to pay monthly or ultimately yearly for stuff like that?
So I would say from what the range of clients that I work with, the most popular ones I see are Toast, Arrived. Of course, I'll blank on the other one right now, but there's three that are
Square?
Clover. So those are and Square would probably be the fourth. You're right. So those are the biggest platforms. I would say they all kind of range in between the $250 to $500 a month.
Okay.
But it's a sliding scale where
that's what
the cheaper ones they hit you on the credit card. If they're processing your credit cards, they hit you on the credit card fee. Or if they're hitting you on the credit card fee, or if they're not hitting you on the credit card fee, they'll hit you on the monthly fee. Yeah. So it's really just a sliding scale. You kind of need to determine. They all cost about the same at the end of the day.
Okay.
It's really based on credit card volume and kind of the end user costs that they charge by, say, credit card swipes.
Sure. Speaking of credit card fees, this is something, and I know we've got a lot of people that listen internationally too, and I don't know enough about it to know how it works everywhere else.
Yep.
But I know that credit card fees can be a real pain for small businesses, and I see a lot of questions online. People asking, well, should I tack it on as a credit card fee or a service fee on the receipt, and then you see somebody on Twitter or whatever, they'll post a picture of it and they'll circle it and everybody's mad, or they'll put it on Reddit. And then some people do
I
like
think that's
cash only.
That's the one person. The one person who gets mad about it. Oh well.
Sure.
So
that's the take.
Be the loudest.
Sure. That is true. So what's your take on it? Does a company just eat it? Do you put it through food costs? Do you put it through do you put it through food cost, or go ahead.
We do keep that as part of the cost of goods sold, because cost of goods sold, anything that really you have to have expense for to run the restaurant, to make your product, goes in the cost of goods sold. So cost of goods sold, you can't sell your product without credit card fees. So it's not a food cost or labor cost, but it's captured in that cost of goods sold, gross profit, gross margin calculations for sure.
Sure.
Do you pass it on to the customer? I've seen it both ways. It's, like I said, it's between 2.5% to 3% a swipe, depending on which provider you go with. It's not cheap. It adds up over time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have $100,000, that's a $3,000 expense that you can't avoid.
Yeah.
As you go.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen more and more companies starting to add that to their bill. And as a consumer, it's, I guess, with everything else in price going up, as a personal David consumer, it doesn't really bother me. I get it. Having been in the restaurant brewery industry for 4.5 years now.
Sure.
I guess I just expect it, because it's all the other rising costs on the business owner.
Yeah.
If there's something they can pass along to the customer, they're probably going to try their best to do it.
Sure.
So I get it.
What about cash discount? What's your thought on that?
I think that makes it harder and harder for your staff to do their job.
Yeah.
Sure. If you want to do it, great. There's obviously the financial incentive to do so.
Sure.
But for the 3% is like a double-edged sword. It's a big enough dollar value to care, but it's also small enough not to care.
Yeah.
And based on the restaurant, based on your clientele, based on where you're located, cash sales are such a small part of your business anyway.
Yeah.
That I think on all my customers, I think total cash sales is probably 5% of their total sales.
Yeah.
Across all clients that I have. So to offer a 3% discount for cash sales, that doesn't make a big enough impact to add that complexity to the staff and try and make it as dummy proof as possible. That's just adding another spot where a touch point could go wrong and hurt the relationship with the customer.
Yeah. What do you think is one of the areas where, or like, just, you hear other people talking, but like, what do you think is some of like the universal bullet points on what people are doing wrong when it comes to operations? So like so like you get a new client and you're going to say, man, if there's a problem, it's probably going to be one of these two things.
I would say, we talked about a bunch already. Definitely food costs.
Food costs. Yep.
Because it's the people who are starting these breweries, they're brewers by trade.
Yep.
They hand the kitchen operations off to somebody else because it's not their background. It's not their sweet spot. And I don't know if they have the transparency to always get into that detail and understand the food cost variation that goes with it.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I laser focus right away. That's an easy improvement. Let's fix that. Let's talk about it. How do you do that as an owner? What kind of parameters do you set with your kitchen managers to do that? So definitely food costs right away.
Sure. Let's take go ahead.
I guess outside of that, it's just reminding them that those are the controllable costs. There's still a bucket of fixed overhead costs below that you can't forget about either.
Yeah.
That we can manage around the controllables. That bucket of fixed overhead costs, you got to keep on the back of your mind, because that's where you're really going to get in trouble if you can't pay those bills at the end of the month.
Sure. And so this transitions pretty nicely into what I wanted to talk about next. So kind of either looking at either brewery acquisition or just starting your own place.
Sure.
What are some of the key mistakes people make in the planning stage of a brewery?
Sure. So I think
from a financial standpoint, obviously.
So just playing a whole picture, I think not having a kitchen really comes to bite people in the butt.
Okay.
That, as we've talked about, breweries are becoming more and more local. People are only spending greater economy without getting into politics. People are seem to be spending less money. They feel a certain way about their finances. They feel, it feels like people think there's a higher cost of living. Whether that's true or not true, based on your political leanings, we can go back and forth. But it feels that way to a lot of people you talk to.
Sure.
So if you're going to go out, I don't think people are going to a lot of spots to have a drink and then go get dinner somewhere else.
Yeah.
But if you're going, you want a one-stop shop because it feels like a better value proposition to yourself.
Yep.
So as you're starting your own place, making sure you have that the bigger footprint, the equipment to go with the kitchen, to make sure you have the right staff in place. Because like I said, it might be nice if you have one beer and then go across the street for dinner. That kind of limits your revenue potential as being a local community gathering spot when everyone's having one beer and leaving, no matter how good your beer is, because they want to have dinner.
Sure. What are one of the things that I hear from other people is from that there were some hidden expenses, some hidden costs that they weren't planning for when they were getting into it. What are some of the things that people underestimate from a cost standpoint?
Sure. I'll call it general utilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's easy to talk about the hop costs this much, the grain costs this much, the yeast costs this much, but not everyone factors in the water cost.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone factors in the electricity it takes to run the brew house.
Mm-hmm.
That all those other things that just kind of add up that aren't necessarily direct input costs, but are part of that larger bucket of overheads where if your lights don't come on, that matters. So you need to make sure you build in that margin to make sure the lights still come on. Yeah,
definitely. And I know we'd been texting back and forth a little bit and discussing some things, and we had kind of touched on the idea of like open book financials, or something like that. What's some of your thoughts on that stuff? First of all, what is that?
Sure. So the general concept that I fully believe in, it's called open book accounting.
Okay.
And that's essentially where you share your financial statements with your entire team.
Okay.
My belief and the belief of open book accounting is the more people who are involved understanding the financials from top to bottom, the more aligned everybody in the company is.
Yep.
That for me to tell my GM that they need to hit a labor cost, food cost, to tell my brewer you need to hit production costs of this. The question always back is, well, why? Why does it matter? How am I missing? What am I not doing right? How can I improve? Or if I kind of lay out every single thing you're spending money on, and you see it in a full P&L, and then you go to the very bottom and you see the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it helps connect dots faster, or you spend less time arguing about this cheese versus that cheese, or that staff versus that staff. It's here's the full picture. I want you to take ownership of your portion.
Yep.
Here's where I think you can control the controllables. I'm not the expert in that. You are. So make sure you execute to that number, to that ratio, to that what have you. And I think that goes throughout every level of the organization. That kind of my general rule of thumb, what I like to tell my clients is that the GM, the brewery manager, they should see everything.
Sure.
They should see the P&L. They should see balance sheet. I think it's okay if they know how much debt you have. I think it's okay to show them how much you're paying yourself even.
Sure.
You don't have to say it's Adam's wage is this, but you can say management wages overall is this. And you can lump in whoever you want to that bucket to make it less clear and give some privacy if you want.
Sure.
But I think that way they at least see that's the bucket. We need to cover this cost because that's the management.
Yep.
So I think GMs and any key employees that you see in the business, they should have full access to it all. Your department managers, call it your kitchen manager, bar manager, head brewer, should at least understand their portion of the P&L.
Sure.
We talked about food costs. That kitchen manager should be all over food costs. He should be all over the revenue he needs to get to make sure that food cost works. That the brewer should understand their efficiency rates. They should know how that impacts the P&L and kind of how you turn tanks through that. But it also goes down to even the bartender servers. Set up goals for them. Tell them that they're part of the line item of the financials. You don't need to share full financials with every server.
Sure.
But it's here's your goal for the week. It's to upsell this product.
Yeah.
This is how, and I explain to them how that impacts the full business. So at least that way you're not sending them on a wild goose chase to just do something because you said. There's a reason, there's a rhyme behind it to kind of make it more beneficial to everybody.
Sure. I think it's oh gosh, I'm gonna lose my point here, David. And I don't want to do that. It's gonna come back to me though. I was gonna riff off of something that you had.
To say it makes employees more engaged in their jobs, I think. It really takes ownership.
Yes. So because you can also have a situation where a bartender sees that when they close out the drawer that you did $20,000 on a Saturday night. And then it's that employee's assumption that $20,000 is being transferred to the owner's pocket. Like that's how that will know. But
I've worked at, yes, that's
absolutely. Well, and there's that impression, right? Because people will see, and I do think sometimes with this open accounting type concept, you can show people. I actually had, and this isn't meant to be a demeaning way of doing it. It's a very clean way of doing it. But they dropped 100 pennies on the table, and then they broke their costs into 1% for every penny, and they start pulling them aside. And so when you see that $20,000 number, you have to start pulling percentages out of that. And then all of a sudden you realize that there's not as many pennies left on that table as you thought there were, right? Right. And that's not to be like an infantilizing kind of, too simple of a breakdown, but I do think it's important for people to understand. And I was in the industry for a long time before I started to understand that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I've said that. I'm like, oh, we sold this, that my boss is doing just fine. And maybe he is, maybe he isn't, right?
Sure.
It
just puts it in more of a realistic view to as many people as you trust, to the managers that you have. You trust them. They should be able to handle that information. And I think having those real life conversations, that they'll understand pretty quick that no, you're not getting rich off that $20,000 night. It's going to pay the bills on Monday and Tuesday when you had a $1,000 night.
Yes. Yeah.
So that rent still costs the same on Monday as Tuesday as it does on Saturday. So
it's true. So going in another direction, but a little bit still somewhat in the startup vein, there's multiple ways of generating capital for your project. And I think the forerunners of this, or not forerunners, but the folks who led the charge on this were Brewdog, with the amount of work that they did on the crowdfunding side, and maybe still continue to do. What are your thoughts on crowdfunding? Let's just say for starting up. Not necessarily expanding, and maybe you could talk about expanding as well, and some of the upsides, downsides, and how it works a little bit, if you could.
Sure. So, as you know, Saucy's done 3 rounds of crowdfunding. I've been heavily involved in every one of those rounds.
Mm-hmm.
We've had successful rounds, we've had fail rounds, and we've had break-even rounds. Right. That there's a lot of costs that go with it. Mm-hmm. So call it, even if you see that someone raised $100,000 of crowdfunding, that doesn't mean the owner gets $100,000 either, right?
Sure.
That there's legal costs, there's accounting costs, there's the listing costs, there's the credit card fees, there's fees for everything in crowdfunding. There's the marketing fees that you have to add money to bring in money, and you hope the ROI is the right ratio for the long enough time.
Yeah.
There's a place for it. It can be successful. That our first Saucy crowdfunding raise, we timed it just right, where it was in 2020. Again, this is going to the expansion, not the startup, but we were looking to expand, and we happened to run into TV commercials for like $100 a spot. And it was right after that presidential election. The TV commercial prices just fell off a cliff.
Sure.
And it just so happened that election back in 2020 lasted 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So we got all this prime time spot on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC for $150 a spot, and it was like, holy crap! And it took off. So that one was incredible because we timed it right with the world event. That it was incredible for that time. We did the second
That's
time,
wild.
and the second time was essentially just a big marketing spend. That every dollar that we raised went back to marketing somehow.
Sure.
That there's a lot of still relying on your personal network to get the crowdfunding up and going. That the platforms they rely a lot on your own momentum that you can create. If you build the momentum should keep you going. But once the momentum stops, then you're back to, well, how do you get more people to find their page? How do you get more people to actually click yes and invest? How do you continue to? And then you call your investors and say, hey, can you put some money into this? And that's always not with a mixed bag. Or you call your dad and say, hey, can you put in your $100? It's a taxing exercise where it can definitely be successful.
Sure.
But it's not, the ROI is not 100 to 1 if you raise $100,000.
Yeah.
Their ROI is like any other project. You really need to think about what you're going to spend. Where it's a 1x, 2x, maybe 3x if you're lucky. If you hit the lottery for a TV commercial like we did on that $100 spot where we got a couple $1,000s out of it because Trump spoke immediately after it.
Sure. Yeah.
So we just happened again. That was one specific example of where it took off, and I can give you 10 where it didn't. So it all balances out to the ROI calculation where there is some risk to it.
Yep.
But it's a good way. It's a good marketing exercise too to really understand where your customers are coming from, what they're looking forward to, and really just because building it can really help you build that community spot if you do it the right way.
Sure. So, I mean, I know Brent, the CEO of Saucy has made this pretty well known. I mean, Saucy is a company that has historically been looking to grow, and they've acquired places. What are some things that you have learned from being a part of that process?
Sure. So I'd say, I guess, again, Cartridge is the best example because it's the one we worked at most and we shared experiences. But it's always finding the right revenue level to make sure it's a sustainable business to start. It's really hard. So we talked about covering overhead. We talked about the controllable costs. Overhead is a fixed bucket. So that fixed bucket, you need to have a certain revenue level based on just the margins we talked about, the 30% food cost and 30% labor cost, your rent, whatever, utilities, everything else. If you don't have enough revenue, it's really hard to cover those fixed costs. So having the right revenue level is a big plus. That's why we were initially intrigued by Cartridge. The former ownership team did a really good job building a nice restaurant brand down in Mainville there that really hit home with the local community, where the revenue level was a great level for us to be at. That's why we were intrigued by the opportunity.
Sure.
That I think one of the Q&As that we saw prior coming into this was, we know why a lot of breweries fail, but what do you look into and see? And we looked at those buckets of controllable costs, and we saw they were out of line. That the food costs were too high, labor costs were too high. So it's okay. We see that. We think we're pretty good operators. How do we know if that's the case? How do we analyze that to see if our gut is right and we think we can operate to our margins that we normally operate everywhere else? So that was when we really got to meet the team, got to meet yourself, Amanda, the rest of the kitchen staff down there. And it was, okay, kind of, here's what we think. Tell us if we're right, wrong. Tell us your experience.
Sure.
Where do you think you're missing? Because if you're up for sale, there's probably a reason for it. So where do you think you're missing? And that's kind of what you guys came to the meeting with, where it was, we didn't have that open book accounting atmosphere, where I didn't really know what I was spending on my food costs. I didn't really know wages for the rest of the staff where I could schedule appropriately.
Sure.
So it was, again, specific to the Cartridge example, it was an eye-opening moment where it was really just how do we give you guys the tools to be successful as we come in and kind of want to do our own thing, but put those processes in place to let you be successful.
Yeah. Well, that's cool, man. Well, listen, so let's first of all, before I want to shift gears back to a little bit of a deeper dive into Brewed Fiscally. But before we do that, is there anything else on the accounting financial side that you think that we haven't touched on yet that would be of value to the listeners?
Not necessarily. and we've only touched on like the overhead stuff briefly, but understanding the difference between gross profit, kind of what your EBITDA is, so earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and kind of what the difference of operating cash flow is. So, okay, now you have your EBITDA. What else are you sending out that's not necessarily in the financial statements?
What is that, David? Can you explain that to me a little bit?
So yeah, breaking down financial statements, you have your revenue minus your cost of goods sold. So that's your food, labor, your bank charges, the paper boxes, the everything else that goes into the product.
Yep.
Then that comes down to a gross profit number. A healthy gross profit number goes a long way to making the rest of it work. That gross profit number varies based on the industry you're in, based on your product mix, everything else. But if you're at a 20 to 25% gross profit, that feels pretty good as you get down to the rest of the lines here. So then as you get to your fixed overhead buckets to get to your EBITDA number, you're looking at your rent, you're looking at your utilities, and your marketing expense, your whatever else that you put in that SG&A bucket that goes into making the business work. That's your EBITDA number. So that's what your P&L will show you as a profit was. You had $100,000 in revenue, you had $25,000 in gross margin, you had $15,000 of overhead expense, so the utilities, rent, everything else, $10,000 of profit. So where does that $10,000 go? Your debt payment does not go in the P&L. It's a balance sheet item, so you have to have enough money to cover your debt payments. You have to have enough money to pay your credit card payments. Whatever else you borrowed, that's not necessarily an expense today, but it was an expense a couple months ago. You have to have money to cover that. So really just making sure you understand the difference of all those different line items and how they impact your bank account goes a long way, I think, kind of setting you up for success.
For sure. Well, listen, man, this has been really good. I am a little bit more involved on the budgetary side at Sonder, so I've been doing some reading on that because I just don't want to be the guy that's sitting there staring at this PowerPoint with his jaw hanging open, trying to figure out what everything means. So this is helpful to me. One thing that I was thinking about was, whether it be for lease, mortgage, what have you, what is the percentage that you feel comfortable paying for rent, lease, mortgage, or whatever for an operating space?
So the industry average is supposed to be around 7 to 10%.
Okay.
So as we were always looking to expand, that was kind of always our ballpark figures. Is do we think we have enough revenue to support that? Meaning, if we had, so that goes back to what we talked about, where if you're just running just a bar, do we feel confident we're going to get enough revenue to cover $10,000 of rent every month?
Yeah.
That's the math exercise you have to do based on your product mix, based on your selling price, everything else. If you feel comfortable with that, then that's great. But that's I wouldn't, going above 10% is where you start to feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It really puts a pressure on you to be a really world-class operator on your cost of goods sold to make sure you have the margin falling down. So yeah, that range.
Do you feel as if because they'll always say location, right? The stronger that location is, does it make you more comfortable going to the higher end of that, and then potentially the weaker the location, the lower the percentage? What makes you laugh? I think that's interesting. That's it.
Benefit of having a good team. Having a good team and different perspectives. That as the accountant, I would always take the conservative approach. I was always nervous we're not going to hit that revenue number.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard to build a brand in a new spot and hit that right location. I think it's hard. It is hard.
Sure.
But you have to have someone who's also the believer, who knows it's going to happen. He's going to make it work. Yeah. So that was always the give and take of the team at Saucy. We had a group of owners who were really passionate. They knew how to drive the business, and they were confident we're going to do it. And you had myself and some of the other accounting team where I believe that too. But let's talk about the downside. What's the risk? It's always been a good give and take with those guys, where there's definitely pluses and minuses to both opportunities. We've hit some home runs. We struck out in Detroit, and you know what? You live and you learn. You're right. Location matters, and if you bat 90%, then you're crushing it. That's a great hit rate.
Yeah, hell yeah.
It's really good to not make those decisions in a silo. Have the team around you, have the right team around you, and the right advisors around you, where it's not just one person believing all by themselves it's going to work. Have someone put paper to pencil or pen to paper and do the math and kind of give you a model, and talk it out, talk through the ups, the pluses, minuses, pros, cons, the risks, advantages, the whole business planning exercise. Do that for every time you want to open a new spot or look for a new location or negotiate a new lease. Do the whole exercise, because it really does create good conversations throughout the team. Sure.
Well, that's interesting, man. Well, listen, I think we'll wrap up with, if we haven't already, or if there's anything that you would like to highlight, and even like, you don't need to give like hardcore quotes, but I know some people would like to know like the types of services you offer, the type of things you can essentially, I look at it like this, the kind of things that you can take off somebody's plate for them, and then generally what people might want to be looking at, price range for something like that, if that's if you're comfortable having that conversation.
Yeah, so sure, like you said, the whole goal of Brewed Fiscally was really just for David to stay involved in the brewing industry. That I wanted to create my own side hustle where I get to have enough connections, get to still enjoy the experience of beer. But I know I have a skill set that most brewery owners, I don't want to say, I guess some brewery owners definitely don't think about until it's too late in the process.
Most is fair to say, Dave. That's cool. You're good saying most.
That's one of those things. And it's the more and more people you meet in the industry, I kind of got that vibe after two or 3 years of working at Saucy. It was, this is like a really niche thing where accounting in the brewing industry is still young. It's a growing industry where there's not a lot of niche accountants who are just efficient in what they do, because you go to Joe's tax shop down the street. He doesn't know a single thing about your business. I'm sure he's a fine accountant, a fine tax preparer. But he's not involved in the business. He doesn't know the levers to pull. He's not really a true advisor to you. He'll just take your numbers and do a tax return. And there's definitely a spot for that. That's great. But I just hope, because of my experience, I think what I try to do here at Brewed Fiscally is just be as efficient as possible, be as transparent as possible, kind of talk these same things through with the owners of these places. It's control the controllables, it's transparency with your team, and it's just talk through decisions as you want to. But I'll be as involved or not involved as you want. But I really want to be here as just a sounding board when you're trying to make some of these financial decisions where you don't necessarily have someone to bounce them off of because it's not in your wheelhouse. So yeah, I'm day to day, like I said, it's really about getting monthly P&Ls based on cash transactions. That I'll do the accruals for month end and get you all caught up on those as well. But really just kind of giving you a real time view of it on a month to month basis. Some other things, like we mentioned, I'll do some payroll importing for you. I will do your sales tax filings if you want. I'll do your year-end tax filings if you want. But it's all really based on how much involvement you want from somebody else, meaning myself, and what kind of involvement you want me to have in your day-to-day business. So how have I priced it so far? I've done an hourly rate. I've done some flat rates. It's really just a matter of. Sorry, did you lose me?
No, you're good. I got you.
My AirPods died as I was talking there.
Oh no, you're still good.
I've done some flat rates. I've done some hourly rates. It's really. I just want to talk to you and figure out what's best for your business, so that way you don't take on an added expense where you can't afford it because I'm not providing that value for your cost.
Sure. Well, listen, David, this was a blast. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you being able to help us get a little bit deeper understanding of some of the stuff on the financial side. And yeah, again, to everybody in the chat, thanks for tuning in this evening, everybody. And we will have the August live stream Q&A, and that'll be the birthday show, baby. I'll be 47. The next time you see me, this man's gonna be 47 years old.
Making me feel young, Adam.
That's right. Well, I'm glad I could do that for you, brother. Well, David, again, thanks so much. Thanks to everybody that's listening, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.